Hey guys, today we're going to cover how to create a black and white simple still life using 3 objects. We've got 3 different types of objects here, each different materials. You've got the ceramics, the glass, and the fruit. So that's going to give you some good practice on how to render different types of textures using oil paint. We're going to be using 2 colors, just titanium white and ivory black. And for brushes, what I'm using is just 4. I've got 2 flat brushes of different sizes, about medium size, one size a little smaller. I've got 1 filbert that's on the smaller side, and then I've got 1 detail brush, round brush. You can see it's well used, and this is Utrecht brand. The flat brushes are Da Vinci, which is one of my favorite brands to use for more textural work. So first thing we want to do is take the medium size flat brush, and I'm using ivory black. You want to put in the horizon line straight across, and you want to put this on the top third of the canvas or close to it. What you want to avoid is putting it right in the middle so that it doesn't create too much of a precise division from top to bottom. This will help to give a better composition. Then you just want to work your way forward, breaking down the objects into simple shapes, and what you're aiming for at this point is just composition and sizing. You want to figure out approximately how big you want your objects to be on the canvas. Remember not to go too small. That's a very common error, is to draw the objects very minuscule on the canvas. And notice that I'm using a series of planes to create the curvature of the form. So I'm not trying to nail the curve right away. I'm trying to break it down into a series of planes. So for example, this curve right here is going to be 3 planes, 1, 2, and 3. Just makes it a little bit more easy to get that symmetry of the object. I'm not focusing on any detail at this point. I just want to get all my basic shapes in and work my way forwards. And I'm at the apple. And I'm not using a lot of paint. I'm keeping it really dry so that I can easily erase if I need to, or paint on top of this later on. It's not really going to influence the actual painting process above it. I'm always comparing where one part of an object is to another. So for example, when I'm rendering this wine glass, I want to see, like, where is this corner in relation to where part of that curve is on the cut. So trying to observe those relationships can really help you get an accurate rendering down of the placement of the objects. Again, making some planes to create the ellipse of the wine glass. Keeping it really rough right now. So that's step 1, more or less, is the basic outline of each object. Spend as much time as you need on this phase. This is really the skeleton of the entire piece. it's much easier to fix anything right now than it will be later on when you get to the actual painting process. So step 2 would be to break it down into light side, shadow side. In this composition, the light's coming from the upper left corner, which of course would mean the shadows are going to be on your right side. So what happens is you get a division coming down the form of the mug here on the right. And that way I know this is my shadow side, this is my light side. And it's following that curve. On the inner section of the mug, that's going to be reversed since the light's going to be hitting here. So you get the shadow on the left side. Same thing on the apple. You're going to get a shadow coming down on that right side, also following the form, so it's curving around this edge here and then back up that way because of this little area here. So just want to pay attention to that curvature. And I'm filling it in lightly. This is optional, you know, it can help to just create more of a division there by lightly filling in the shadow side, so you have that very clear delineation. The other thing you want to add in, you don't see it too much on the actual setup, but what can help a lot of the time is to add a cast shadow. And those will also be on the right side. And because the light is in the front left area, so it's hitting the object mainly on the front part, that means the cast shadow is going to be going behind the object, diagonal up that way. Just like that, and it just fades as it goes back. With glass it's the same idea, but because of the material you're not really going to get much of a strong shadow. It's going to be very faint, so you might not see it at all when you get to the actual painting. So with the apple, same thing, you get a bit of a cast shadow going on here. You got a cast shadow underneath the handle as well here, because of the way the light is hitting. And to fill up some of the space down here, I have the corner of the tabletop cutting across this way. Since I have the room for it, I might as well just fill it in here and create a plane change. So all of this, I'm going to have be a little darker. With glass, because it's transparent, you're not going to get this, of course, with the shadows coming down, but you do get these reflections that cut through. This is going to vary on every setup, but you just want to observe where they're hitting and get a feel of like the directions that they're going in. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point, you just want to get an idea. So that's pretty much what we need for the underpainting part of it. We're about ready to start the actual painting process. Since this is just a value study, we're going to continue in black and white. Starting always with the background first and working your way forward. That's a general rule with oil painting. And with this background, I don't really have like a background setup on this one. It's just these curtains here, but I'm just going to make one up by keeping it a simple tone, a continuation of this black fabric going up into the background. So what I'm going to do is just take pure ivory black, and let me actually use a bigger brush. Start blocking in that whole area. You just want to be very free with it. Keep it really loose, changing the directions of your strokes. This is what they call scumbling. So just loosely applying paint. You could use some medium for this to get the paint to spread a little better. I personally like to use pure paint, but just remember that the general rule with oil painting is you want your darker colors to be thinner than your lighter colors. So with ivory black being pretty much the darkest you can get with an oil painting color, I'm keeping it very thin, very lean paint. And the reason for that is when you get to the lights on your painting, if the paint is a thicker consistency on your lights, it's going to enhance the sense of form on the objects, and as well as the sense of light. It's going to appear more luminous. So with traditional oil painting, it's a pretty important rule, is just to keep your darker colors thinner, lighter colors thicker. And I'm also painting a little bit over my outline. Don't be afraid to just kind of overlap there. A very common mistake people will make when they start oil painting is they'll be afraid to bump up right against that edge because they want to preserve their drawing. But it's better to just overlap a bit so that you can just get a nice clean transition when you get to painting the cup here, for example, and have that edge bump right up against the background rather than being left with a gap in between. So there we go. Just got a simple background blocked in with ivory black. And then going down into the foreground area, so the ground plane, we just want to make that a darker value compared to the background. So I'm going to add a touch of white, but it's still going to be very dark. Touch of titanium white into the ivory black, and you can see it's just slightly lighter than the background. Want to be sure to have enough paint mixed up, so squeeze out as much as you need. Try not to spread your paint too much. You do want to keep it thin, like I said, but at the same time you don't want to just be staining the canvas. So just blocking in this whole ground plane, again bumping into the edges of the objects. You want to overlap the outline so that you're not left with a gap. I am going around the cast shadows, so I'm treating that as its own area. And with the glass, you can just go ahead and add some of this color directly into it. I'll save some room for the outline there, just so I know where it is. But due to the transparency, I can just add some of this color right in. So we've got the ground plane blocked in. I'll go ahead and add in the cast shadows falling behind the objects. Let me squeeze out a little more paint for that. Some ivory black. More or less pure ivory black for the cast shadows, similar to what I have back here. And I'm going to lightly apply those where I have them mapped out. So with cast shadows, what you want to pay attention to is how they fade as they go further away from the object. The edge of that cast shadow is going to be a tiny bit sharper towards the object, and then it's just going to diffuse as it goes back. Same with the apple here. All right. And then what I want to mention too is for this horizon line that we got here, you don't want this to be too sharp. You want to have it slightly blended, and you could do a clean blend if you choose to, and just take a pretty dry brush, wipe it off, and pressing very lightly, you want to graze right in between both colors, the lighter gray and the black that's above it here. And just grazing the surface across will give you a nice hazy edge. If you want more of a loose consistency, you can break that up a bit by just carefully grazing over that, giving it a looser kind of look. But it doesn't have to be this clean, sharp edge all the way through unless you're going for more of like a contemporary or photorealist type of look. That could be to your advantage at that point. But with this type of painting that we're doing, we want to have it more focused on the objects and less on like this clean photorealist type of style. So down here what I'm going to do is, again, a darker variation of this gray, darker value, adding more ivory black, following the line that I blocked out for it. So same idea here as what we just did, is we just want to keep it a little bit blended. Although if this is a sharp corner, the blend can be a little more abrupt. It doesn't have to be too diffused. There we go, all the way through. Want to make sure that the plane here is parallel to the bottom of my canvas. Same thing here, let's double check that. And that's pretty good right now for the background. We can always revisit it later if we choose to and add more gradations and things like that, but we have a good starting point. So now getting into the objects, we'll start with the mug since that's one of the more straightforward objects here. So using the two parts that we've divided it into, the light side, shadow side, what we're going to start with is the shadow side and block that in with some thicker paint, and then we're going to move on to the light side and block that section in. So still keeping it divided into two areas, but giving it a little more form and definition at this point. Alright, so because of the color of the mug, it's like this very light off-white, even the shadow side is going to be lighter than the fabric. So taking more titanium white and applying it in there, still keeping the paint fairly thin on the shadow area. I just want to make sure that it really stands out from the background. A little more white. That's better. So staying within this division that we mapped out. Painting all the way to the edge. Same thing here on the shadow area. And finally, the cast shadow under the handle. Alright, so that gives us the shadow areas mapped out. Next, we're going to do the light side. So, wiping off my brush, taking a lot more white, and in this case, we're going to start keeping the paint a thicker consistency. Titanium white with just a touch of ivory black. And filling in this lighter area on the left side. One simple color value at this point. And we can make refinements later. There we go. Then carrying that color up into the inner section of the mug, right here. And then as we bump into the shadows, we want to blend. So always try to follow the main direction when you're blending. So in this case, it's going to be going downwards. So dry brush and pressing extremely lightly in between both colors, all the way down. And you can see how that softens it really nicely there. Gives it a nice diffused edge. Same thing here, just a slight blend. And you've got two basic shadows that you're paying attention to, and that's displayed in this mug. So you've got a form shadow here, which is very diffused, and you've got a cast shadow, which would be right here, being cast by this side of the mug, and underneath the handle, right here. So those are going to have sharper edges. You don't need to blend as much there. You can a little bit, but try not to make it too diffused. go ahead and block in the handle with some light. Coming all the way down to here and around. Anytime you're painting on top of a wet surface, if you want the paint to really sit on top without getting too mixed up, it's all about how hard you press. So pressing really lightly will allow that paint to just sit right on top of that wet area. So we've got it mapped into the light side, shadow side with some more form going on. Now what we can do is start to focus on more of the details, the divisions, like more minute divisions that you see on the shadows. You can see a reflective light that cuts across down this way and gets lighter value there. And then you've got the edge of the rim, which is going to wrap around here, which is also light. And then you've got all sorts of kind of transitions that are happening on the bottom of the handle here. So I'm going to switch to a smaller brush and start focusing more on these. This is my number 2 detail brush, the round brush. I think I'll start with the rim, taking more white, and then lightly applying the paint on top of this upper edge of the mug. Extremely light pressure so that the paint sits right on top. Sometimes it can help to anchor the brush with your pinky finger so you rest it on the board here, and that can give you more stability. And what I'm doing at this point too is I can start to refine the edges. When you first apply the paint on the objects, you can see that you get these choppy edges, which is totally fine. But at this point, the more you work into the objects, the more you want to refine those edges. So starting to get more of a clarified edge here, more focused, sharper, and paying more attention to the actual symmetry. I want to make sure I have that really spot on, making any adjustments that I need. There's a little bit more here. Go ahead and refine that edge. Sometimes it can help to just take the background color, and if you need to cut into part of the object, just go ahead and drag that paint into it and chisel out that edge. So now you want to get the reflective light, which cuts down on the right outer section of the shadow. So this is still going to be part of the shadow area, but it's going to be that lighter area of it. So taking a bit of white, lightly apply the paint all the way down, always going downwards. I'm not going horizontal. I'm just following that main direction, similar to blending. Also paying attention to the symmetry and refining the edge of the mug, making sure that it's a little more specified. Now, with the intersection of the reflective light, you always want to blend it, so it's going to be very diffused. While keeping the outer edge sharp. Just like that. I feel like I need to blend this section a little more. Taking more white and working it into this side of the shadow. All the way down. What I'm aiming for is just to get the shadow section a little bit thinner, since that's what I see. All right, that's better. I'm going to capture more of the edge on the left side now by taking the white and applying it, pulling out that edge. All the way down to the bottom, and refining the bottom edge. Paying attention to symmetry. If you need to take some of the background color to chisel into it, go ahead and do that. All right, so now what we want more of is the handle, capturing the transitions here. So there's going to be a shadow towards the bottom of the handle that we're going to put in. Touch of ivory black, working it in. And that will diffuse as it goes up. The outer edge on the right side is going to be lighter. And then you want to get more of the nuances on this inner curve here. So I detail where the shadow appears right in between both areas. And curves underneath this loop. We'll make this left side a little brighter so it stands out from the background better. There we go. So you can see now we have a lot more specificity with the form. It's starting to get more of that curvature because of the blending that we have. The final thing you want to focus on to really convey the form is the highlights. So that's going to be these little taps of light, the brightest spots that you see on the mug. Taking a lot more white. Pretty thick on the brush, and aim for the strongest highlight, which would be the front left side here. It's going to hit right on the rim and just lightly apply it. Small little speck like that. You don't have to blend much at all because it's so small. The light will travel across and hit the other side on the river. So right here. Small highlight. And a tiny one here as well on the handle. And there's one right here. All right, so that's pretty much what we need for the mug. And let's move on to the apple. That's going to be slightly more complex, but using a lot of the same type of techniques that we have in here. It's also darker than the mug, so we're going to use a bit more black. I'm switching back to my flat brush and taking titanium white, ivory black. And on this one, I'm gonna mix the light side first, just to show you how to work in reverse from what we did here. It doesn't really matter which one you start with, as long as you keep those two sections separate. It's only going to be slightly darker than the mug. But definitely lighter than the background. Substantially lighter. So somewhere about there is what you're aiming for the value. Overlapping the edge and keeping it contained within this delineation that we made earlier. All right, so there's your light side. You'll get a very small section here that's a patch of light underneath this little curve. And then the rest of it here is going to be shadow. Some more black. But again, shadow will still be lighter than the background. So about there. Have it follow the form.